You stayed up until 3 in the morning, cold coffee, flashcards with bent corners, reading the same chapter until the words lost their meaning. But it worked. The next morning, you walked into the exam, the facts were there, and you passed. But a week later, you tried to explain that material to a friend and found almost nothing left. A few stray words, a vague shape, but the rest had simply evaporated. You did the work, you got the grade, and yet the knowledge slipped through your fingers. Most people respond to this by blaming themselves. They decide they have a bad memory, that they aren't smart enough, or that the material was just too hard to hold on to. But the failure of that night had nothing to do with your brain's capacity. The all-nighter was never going to last, regardless of how disciplined you were. Stacking your effort into a single block of time is the exact shape of learning the human mind is built to forget. It is a measured, century-old fact, and it explains why cramming eventually betrays everyone who tries it. To see why, we have to look back to a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. In the 1880s, he performed an incredibly tedious experiment on himself. He memorized thousands of meaningless nonsense syllables and tested his own recall across different stretches of time. What he mapped became known as the forgetting curve. Memory does not fade gently, it collapses. The steepest drop happens almost immediately, and within a week you can lose 90% of what you learned. When you cram for an exam, you climb that curve exactly once, and a curve you climb only once is a curve you are guaranteed to slide right back down. This 90% loss is the default setting of the human brain. It is not a personal weakness, it's how memory behaves for everyone. This raises an obvious question. If forgetting is this relentless, how does anyone ever remember anything for good? Ebbinghaus saw the answer in his data. The forgetting curve isn't fixed. Every time you relearn, the curve gets flatter. This is the spacing effect. Repetitions spread out in time produce longer-lasting memories than crammed ones. Identical information, but with a different gap. To understand why the gap matters, think of your memory like wet concrete. When you first learn something, it is soft and easily erased. Over time, it sets. If you press your hand into that concrete twice in 1 minute, it is still wet. You're just remaking the same shallow mark. That is what cramming does. But if you wait and come back when the concrete has partly hardened, that second press forces the material to do real work. It has to give, reshape, and reset stronger than before. This is reconsolidation. When you retrieve a memory, you don't just play back a recording, you pull it into an unstable state and store it all over again. The more a memory has settled before you disturb it, the more powerful that restorage becomes. And there's a second, quieter force doing vital work while you aren't even awake to notice it happening. When you space your learning across several days, you force it to cross at least one night of sleep. This is when the brain actively files memories away, moving them from fragile short-term storage into durable long-term networks. Cramming robs your brain of the time it needs to do this overnight biological work. Spacing hands the brain that time on a plate. But knowing when to study is only half the puzzle. You also have to change how you study. Most people rely on rereading, which feels productive because the words look familiar as your eyes glide along. This is the illusion of competence. That smooth feeling of familiarity tricks you into believing you know the material, but you actually just recognize it. And recognition is a pale imitation of memory. The real engine of learning is retrieval. You have to close the book and pull the answer out of your head, even when uncomfortable. Every time you successfully drag a fact back into the light, you make it easier to find next time. You are physically strengthening the neural pathway to that information. If the studying feels easy and fluent, the memory is likely vanishing. If it feels difficult and shaky, you are building permanence. The struggle is the learning. Consider two students who both have 10 hours to study for the same exam in 3 weeks. The first student saves all 10 hours for one heroic, miserable night right before the test. The second student spends 20 minutes a day. They use the Leitner system, a series of flashcard boxes where the cards they get right move further into the future, while the ones they miss stay close for review. The ideal gap between sessions depends on how long you need to remember the information. If the test is 7 days away, your reviews should be 1 day apart. If you need to remember it for a month, that gap stretches to 8 days. You lengthen the intervals as the material settles. On the morning of the exam, both students might score the same, but a month later, the crammer is left holding fragments, while the spacer still owns the knowledge. They invested the exact same 10 hours, but the shape of their calendar changed the results. Spacing also changes the way you use what you've learned. It improves transfer, the ability to apply memorized facts to a problem you've never encountered before. We often treat a gifted memory as a measure of natural talent, but so much of what looks like talent is actually a better schedule wearing a disguise. The next time you want to learn something you intend to keep, resist the pull of the all-nighter. Don't ask how many hours you can stock into tonight. Ask how you can scatter those same hours across the weeks ahead. Learn a little, then walk away. Trust the discomfort of reaching for the answer tomorrow. You aren't studying less. You're letting the knowledge soak in until it becomes a permanent part of the ground itself.